This is the last part of measures of variation, and in this lesson I will explain to you how to calculate the variance and standard deviation for a group data. So these are the 6 points which you have to keep in mind when you calculate the variance and standard deviation for group data. First point is find the midpoint. Find the midpoint of each class and class boundaries. If you have mentioned class boundaries in the question, then you have to calculate the midpoint of the class boundaries. If you have a class mentioned in your question, then you have to find out the midpoint of the classes. I will show you in the next slide what is the difference between class and class boundaries and how you calculate the midpoint. Second point is then you have to multiply midpoint to the frequency. In the first step, we have calculated the midpoint. In the second step, we have to multiply midpoint and frequency by the midpoint. Third is you have to make the square of the midpoints, which we have calculated in step number 1. Then you have to multiply the square of midpoint to the frequency. In step number 2, directly you have to multiply midpoint with frequency. In step number 3, you have to make the square of the midpoint first, then you have to multiply with the frequency. Then we can have 3 columns, important columns B, D and E. Column B represents N, right? I will show you again in the table. The sum of column D represents summation of F. This dot represents multiplication. XM means frequency multiplied by midpoint, and E column represents summation of F multiplied by X square, means frequency multiplied by square of the midpoints. Then you have to put this value, and number of N in the formula in order to calculate the variance and standard deviation. So I will show you, if you have a data available in the form of a group, then how you can calculate the variance and standard deviation. Just keep in mind the above 6 steps. So the first column represents the class boundaries or classes. So in this question we have class boundaries, and boundary is from 3.5 to 8.5, then 8.5 to 13.5. If someone asks you what is the class limit of the first one, then you have to say 4 to 8. How I say 4 to 8? Because boundaries are always 0.5 less than the lower class limit. So if I subtract 0.5 from 4, you will get 3.5. And this is called the lower class boundary or lower class limit. This is the upper class limit or the upper class boundary. And the upper class boundary, you have to add 0.5 to the upper class limit. So 8.5. So what is the class of this? The class of this should be 9 to 13, because 9 negative 0.5 will be 8.5 and 13 plus 0.5 equal to 13.5. So in the case of boundaries, you have to subtract 0.5 from the lower class limit and you have to add 0.5 to the upper class limit, right? So this is the class boundaries. Then we have frequencies, and if we make the total, 2 plus 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 and 9, 18. So this is N. We have to use this N in our question, and when we will put the values in the formula. Column C, you have to make the midpoint of this boundaries. 3.5 plus 8.5 divided by 2, which is equal to 6. Similarly, 8.5 plus 13.5 divided by 2, you will get 11, and so on. This is the midpoint. You have to add this and then divided by 2, you will get 31. Column C is done. Now column D, you have to multiply this frequency with the midpoint, right? 12. 3 multiplied by 11, 33. 1 multiplied by 16, 16. So this is the multiplication of these two columns. You will get column D. How we will calculate column E? You have to make the square of this column C. 6 square. 6 times 36 multiplied by 2, which is 72. 11 11 times 121 multiplied by 3, which is equal to 363. So this column you have to make the square of the midpoint, then multiply by this frequency, right? So you have to make the total of column B, column D, column E, which is mentioned here, B, D, and E. We have made it. Now we have to put these. F dot x square means frequency multiplied by square of the midpoint. This is frequency multiplied by midpoint. So these we have to put in the formula, and this is the formula. S square is equal to n, and then in bracket this summation of f dot x square m. This is ys because this is for the sample. This is the variance of the sample. If we are calculating the variance of population, then we have to use sigma square, and for a standard deviation sigma, for a standard deviation of sample only s, because we are taking the square root, and this is the formula. So number of n is 18, and this is the midpoint square f summation. So it was 9200 from here. This is the total of this and the total of this one. When we will make the multiplication and simplification, we will get 76.47, which is the variance. If we take the square root of this variance, approximate, and this represent approximation, our standard deviation is 8.74. Right? So in this lesson you have learned how to calculate the variance and standard deviation of a group data. Whenever you have a group data, you have to make this table and make the total of column B, D, and E, and put these values in the formula. You will get the variance and take the square root of the variance in order to calculate the standard deviation. If still you have any question, write down in comment section, and thanks for watching.